You feel safe because you believe that inanimate objects lack a will of their own. You look at your phone, your chair, or that dusty old toy in the corner of your room as nothing more than hollow vessels, submissive to the rigid, unyielding laws of physics. But have you ever woken up in the suffocating blackness of the night, amidst a silence so heavy it stings, and suddenly felt that one of those objects was watching you with an unnatural intensity? In a silent temple in Hokkaido, Japan, there exists an entity that defies every law of biology and physics you were ever taught in school. She does not breathe, yet she changes. She possesses no internal organs, yet she continues to grow. To the masses, she is merely a wooden doll, but to the scientists and researchers once permitted to examine her samples, she is a bitter reality that dismantles the very foundation of modern logic. Her name is Okiku, and as you listen to this narration, strand by strand, the hair on that porcelain head is lengthening, micrometer by micrometer, driven by the residual consciousness of a little girl who should have been nothing but dust in a grave since 1918. Today, we aren't just talking about a ghost story or an exaggerated urban legend. We are talking about a terrifying anomaly of matter, living proof that human energy does not always dissipate when the heart stops beating. I am going to unearth the dark history of the Suzuki family, trapped in a vortex of grief, and the mystery of their daughter's death, whose medical cause remains a black hole to this day. More importantly, I will reveal why the dead objects in your own home right now might just be waiting for the right emotional spark to wake up, find a host, and begin manifesting a life of their own. We live in a civilization that worships logic, or at least that's what we want to believe so we can sleep soundly at night. Modern society has indoctrinated you with a concept I call Normsense, a collective illusion designed to keep you calm, compliant, and functioning within the economic gears without ever questioning the true nature of reality. We are taught from childhood that death is an absolute finish line, a concrete wall that cannot be breached. We are forced to believe that consciousness is merely a chemical byproduct of our biological brains. When the heart stops, everything ends. Darkness, emptiness, period. This is a collective lie we swallow whole, just so we don't have to tremble in fear when staring at the shadows beneath our beds. We are accustomed to treating the objects around us as empty vessels, static and devoid of memory. However, the long history of the Suzuki family in Hokkaido has come to demolish that entire structure of logic to its deepest foundations. It all began in 1918, an era where superstition and reality still frequently bled into one another. A young man named Eikichi Suzuki was visiting a grand exhibition in Sapporo. Amidst the chaos of the crowd, his eyes fell upon a traditional Japanese doll, 40 centimeters tall. She wore an elegant red kimono, possessed skin as white as fresh snow, and jet-black eyes that seemed to hold an impossible depth. Eikichi bought it as a gift for his beloved 3-year-old sister, a child named Kikuko. At that time, the doll was nothing more than a pile of wood, paint, porcelain, and cloth. A mass-produced object that should have held no more meaning than a toy destined to be broken by the passage of time. But destiny had a far darker design. Death entered the warm Suzuki home without knocking. Little, cheerful Kikuko suddenly fell ill. To this day, over a century later, the source of her sickness remains a dark medical mystery, debated by historians. Records mention a fever so intense it scorched her delicate nerves within days. There is medical speculation that it was yellow fever, which was then plaguing several parts of the world, or perhaps merely a common cold, a simple chill that somehow mutated into a lethal infection for her fragile, tiny body. Kikuko died at a very tender age, 3 years old, in a heartbreaking condition. She was still clutching the doll her brother had given her as she lay on her bed. As her final breath escaped and her body grew cold, something severed from her biological shell. But that something refused to vanish into the afterlife. The Suzuki family, shattered by an unspeakable grief, could not bear to throw the doll into the grave with their child's body. Instead, they placed it on the family altar as a focal point for worship and memory. And there, in that dim altar room thick with the scent of incense, the laws of nature as we know them began to warp and distort in a terrifying way. Let us use a biological bridge to dissect this horror more deeply, so you understand why this isn't just folklore. According to medical science, human hair is a complex biological structure that depends entirely on living systems to exist and grow. It requires active follicles embedded beneath the skin, a continuous supply of oxygen delivered through blood circulation, and a steady intake of nutrients, especially proteins like keratin, to sustain its development. This is not speculation. It is a fundamental principle of human anatomy. From every known scientific perspective, physical, medical, and chemical, it is impossible for an inanimate object, something made only of wood, fabric, and paint, to generate or sustain biological tissue identical to that of a living human being. And yet, there are cases that seem to exist just outside the comfort of that certainty. When the Suzuki family first noticed something unusual about the doll, it did not happen suddenly. At first, it was subtle, almost easy to dismiss. The doll's hair, originally cut into a neat chin-length bob, appeared slightly longer than before, a minor detail, something that could be explained away as imagination, memory distortion, or even lighting. But as weeks passed, that small inconsistency became harder to ignore. The hair continued to extend, gradually slipping past the shoulders, inching downward, as if guided by a process no one could see. What began as doubt slowly transformed into quiet unease. Driven by a need for answers, strands of the hair were eventually examined under magnification. The findings were deeply unsettling. The strands displayed characteristics consistent with real human hair: visible cuticles, a defined structure, and the presence of keratin. It did not behave like synthetic fiber. It did not resemble decorative material. It looked biological. And that raised a question that no one in that room could comfortably answer. How could something lifeless produce something that appears alive? Some interpretations attempt to approach this phenomenon through unconventional perspectives, ideas involving emotional imprinting or residual energy. It has been suggested that the intense emotional attachment of a young child, Kikuko, toward the doll may have left behind something more than memory. Not a ghost in the traditional sense, but a form of presence, subtle, persistent, and embedded into the object itself. In this view, the doll is no longer merely a possession, but a vessel, holding something that cannot be easily defined or measured. In 1938, the Suzuki family, unable to reconcile what they were witnessing, entrusted the doll to Mannenji Temple in Hokkaido. There, it was placed under the care of monks, not as an exhibit, but as something to be respected and maintained. Over the years, reports have remained consistent. The hair continues to grow and must be trimmed periodically. The doll itself remains enclosed within a glass case, motionless, silent, and outwardly unchanged. And yet, those who have spent extended time observing it sometimes describe a different impression. Subtle shifts in expression, a faint alteration in the positioning of the lips, as if something about its stillness is not entirely static. There is no scientific consensus that explains these claims. No verified study has conclusively demonstrated ongoing biological activity. And still, the persistence of the story continues to create discomfort, not because it proves anything, but because it refuses to fully disappear. It exists in that uncertain space between documented reality and interpretive belief. If an object can retain emotional significance, if it can carry the weight of memory so intensely that it begins to alter our perception of it, then perhaps the unease surrounding the Okiku doll is not rooted in what it is, but in what it represents. It challenges the boundary we draw between the living and the non-living, between what we understand and what we cannot easily explain. Because in the end, the most unsettling possibility is not that the doll is alive, but that our understanding of lifeless may not be as complete as we believe. And sometimes, what disturbs us most is not movement, not sound, but the quiet persistence of something that remains still, and yet never truly stays the same.